Good morning. For those of you that were not able to join us last night, the Lehigh Valley Book Festival kicked off last night with Gina Lovelace's book, Puberty is Gross, but also really awesome. And we highly recommend that book because boy, did I wish I had that about 5 years ago. It's incredibly inclusive and really up to date, and something that all families and libraries are going to want to have access to. And for 5 more weeks, we will have programming at 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock on Friday evenings, mostly 6 o'clock. We tried to get before sunrise for our Jewish readers. And then on Saturday at 10 o'clock in the morning. So we hope to have 2 in-person events, but that's, on April 24th, it's Independent Bookstore Day, and we'll be celebrating everything. Yay, thank you, Donna. Everything that has to do with books, and we'll have all of the books that we have here featured, and we have signed copies for almost everybody, which is great. And then on May 1st, which is the last day of the festival, we'll be at the Bethlehem Area Public Library outside so that people can get books from the whole festival and see what maybe they missed, along with a couple princesses, including Raya, the new one, which people want to see. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Paul Acampora, who is one of our favorite authors of all time, but more importantly, one of our favorite people of all time. He's a local author who has written multiple books, the most recent of which I adore, but it's still fun to talk about because the title and the cover, I'm sure I should have had it. Danny Constantino's first date and maybe last. And I mean, look at the cover. How fun is this? Anyway, so Paul is one of our favorite middle grade authors, and he is a perfect person to have a discussion with our 3 special guests. So with that, thank you for coming, and I will turn it over to Paul.
Thanks, Kirsten. Thanks, everybody. Good morning and welcome to the Lehigh Valley Book Festival. Again, thanks to Kirsten and to Maddie and Jim and all our friends at Let's Play Books for doing this for our entire community. We have a great hour ahead with 3 wonderful authors and friends. We're going to talk today, let me say, I have my stack here. We're going to talk about Houdini and Me by Dan Gutman. We're going to talk about The Boy Who Failed. That could have been the whole title right there. The Boy Who Failed Show and Tell by Jordan Sonnenblick, and Abby Tried and True, which is, this book just made me cry, Donna, by Donna Gephart. Donna also has a new picture book out this year too. You should check out Go Be Wonderful, which is illustrated by the wonderful Francesca Chessa. So we only have an hour today, so we're going to get right into it. And one question I have for the 3 of you, which is a question I often ask myself, is what is it about, since it's about middle grade, what is it about middle grade characters, this age group, that draws you, not from the readers? Middle graders are often as awesome as human beings, but as characters in your story, why do you find them so attractive in terms of generating stories for you? And I'll start with Dan, since Dan, you're our senior member here in terms of making books. I don't know about age, but in terms of making books, you're our leader.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, let me think. Middle grade. I started out doing middle grade, and I've done books for kids of all ages, from kindergarten through 6th grade. But I find that middle grade works best for me, partly from a marketing standpoint, because younger kids want to read up. They aspire to be older, so they want to read about kids, in 4th, 5th, 6th grade. 4th, 5th, and 6th graders are going to want to read them too, obviously. And even kids who are in older grades, who maybe are not on a reading level quite as their peers, they would appeal to middle grade novels too. So it's kind of a middle ground, kind of a sweet spot as far as a writer goes. And I guess my brain kind of naturally, I never got older than 11 years old mentally anyway. So it's just kind of, I naturally write for that age group without having to really try, without having to think like, oh, I'm writing for fourth graders, so I better say blank. I don't have to do that. It just kind of happens naturally for me anyway.
Fantastic. Donna, what's your experience there?
Well, we were talking about the book Puberty is Gross and also Awesome. And I did some research, and it said that when you go through puberty, your brain is just flooded with hormones that increase and intensify your emotions, which we can all relate to that. And when your emotions are intensified like that, you tend to remember things more. So I don't know about you, but I really remember that period in my life. So it's so clear still. I'm 55. It's still so clear, but parts of it were really hard and really painful. It was like an emotion roller coaster during that time. And I want to write books for kids that age, for myself that age, that make them feel less alone in the world, that tell them it's okay. All these crazy emotions and things that you're feeling, it's totally normal. You're going to be okay. You're going to get through this. And that's why I write for that age.
Oh, wonderful. And Jordan, now your book is a memoir. I actually listened to your book on audio as well as having read it. And similarly, you've just captured the voice of, even though it's you, but the voice is not you today. I'm curious, again, also related to your other books, that middle grade place. Why are you writing there?
Okay, so I've written all the way up to like 17-year-old main characters and all the way down to fourth grade. But what appeals to me so much specifically about like writing this fourth grade memoir is that I actually wrote a memoir for adults about my teaching career and how things that had happened to me when I was a kid affected the teacher I became, and how the things that teachers did wrong that I didn't want to replicate, and the things that teachers did right that I did want to replicate. And I realized when I finished writing, 350 pages of this book, that's not the story. The story is the incidents I remember most vividly from when I was the kid. That's the part I can really put myself into. And so I wrote this fourth grade memoir. The sequel is about the sixth grade. Because the fifth grade, not much happened. It was a pretty tranquil year. So one thing I like about memoir is you get to choose that chunk. But yes, it was very easy for me to be right back in fourth grade.
That's fantastic. Well, something, interesting, Johnny, it's almost like you can see my list of questions in terms of emotion. Because at first glance, Houdini and Me, The Boy Who Failed Show and Tell, Abby Tried and True, they seem like very different books. There's historical fiction, real life memoir, and this straight from the heart fiction. But to me, each book is really built upon just really deeply emotional experiences, good and bad. And then each of you really trust your readers and their abilities to see it, like to get it. And I'm curious, in each of these books, like, where did they start for you? And I'll go to Donna first, like, where did this story start? Because it just has such an emotional heart.
Thank you. So Abby Tried and True took me 17 years to write. 18 years ago, I had ovarian cancer, and I had surgery and treatment for that. And it was just one of the hardest things I've ever gone through in my life. And after that, I went to a camp that's usually for kids with cancer, but they had it for adults. And then I started volunteering at a camp for kids with cancer. And I just knew I needed to translate my experience into a book for kids. I just had to do that. And Jordan's shaking his head because of your beautiful book about, dealing with cancer. It's just so intense and difficult and challenging, and not just for the person going through it, but for the whole family. So in Abby Tried and True, Abby is the sibling of her brother who's diagnosed with testicular cancer. So it shows the effect on her and the entire family, how everybody has to pull together, how it's so stressful, how it's so hard. So it came from my own experience, and I have an author's note in the back that explains it.
Fantastic. And Dan, I mean, at first glance, I told somebody your book, Houdini and Me, is exactly the kind of book when I was a kid that made me say, this is why I want to be a reader and a writer. And yet, at the same time, that your character is making big decisions about life, the world, and everything. And so it's like it's like a magic trick of a book. And I'm curious where again, what's the heart of that story for you?
Yeah, it started because I have a hobby, which is I collect addresses of famous people because I think it's really cool to walk down the street and feel like, oh, so and so lived here, or some really famous event took place here. I kind of get off on that, So like I live in Manhattan, and so there's the plaques on the wall saying where people live, like. So I was walking down the street one day and I saw, oh, Babe Ruth lived in this apartment building. Cool, And then I walk in a different direction. Oh, look, Edgar Allan Poe lived here, and George Gershwin wrote Rhapsody in Blue in this apartment building. Whoa, cool. And oh, wow, look at this. Humphrey Bogart lived the first 4 years of his life in this building. So I kind of like really enjoy this kind of thing. And I was walking down the street one day, 8 blocks from my apartment, and I saw this plaque on the wall. I don't know if you can read it, but it's
Yeah.
Houdini lived there. Harry Houdini, the last 22 years of his life. And I write historical fiction often, and I like to blend fact and fiction together. So I thought, maybe I could do a book about Houdini. He's one of those characters that like everybody, even young kids know, like Babe Ruth, like Elvis Presley,
Mhm.
even like kids in first grade know who Houdini was. He was an escape artist. He could escape from shackles and handcuffs and anything. But I discovered in researching his life that there was one thing he could not escape from, which was his own death. He died in 1926. And some people refuse to believe that he actually did die because he was such an amazing, he did such amazing escapes. So I thought, what if there was a kid who lived in Houdini's house on 113th Street near me? And what if he was able to somehow communicate with Houdini from beyond the grave, right? That was my original thought. So I learned all about Houdini and packed a lot of facts into it. And one of Houdini's most famous tricks was called metamorphosis, where he would switch places with another person, usually his wife, Bess. So I thought, boom, Houdini could switch places with this kid so that Houdini comes into the 21st century and the kid goes back to the 1920s, where he finds himself in a straitjacket hung upside down from a building and he's got to escape. So anyway, Houdini, I won't tell you the whole story, but Houdini, he was a bit of an egomaniac, and he decides that he wants to make the metamorphosis permanent. So he wants to live in the 21st century, and the kid's going to be stuck in the 1920s, whether he likes it or not. And the kid has to figure out a solution to this problem, which is the big surprise ending, which I won't tell you. But
Well, that was one of the things that I found most intriguing about the book is Houdini. In a similar book that was written in the 1970s or 80s, Houdini would be this hero to aspire to, and he came from nothing. But in your book, he's a more complicated character, and then it puts the kid in a position to make some hard and scary decisions in his relationship with a hero, and I just loved it.
yeah,
So,
Houdini kind of does actually become the bad guy in the story. Oh,
yeah.
I shouldn't have said that. Oh, well.
So, spoiler alert. Jordan, back to your book. You said there was a moment when you realized, and I think everybody who's done this for a little while has had that experience of writing 10 or 20 or 50 or God forbid 350 pages and realizing, oh no, this isn't the book. And also to your book, Jordan, I mean, I think it just took a great deal of courage to say, this is actually about me. When did the character, fourth grade Jordan, voice become loud enough? Because that's kind of what happens to me. Like the voices of characters become so loud that you're like, oh no, I got to write your story. And but for you, it was you, and just that again. Where did that? When did you make the leap faith, if you will, into saying, I'm going to do this?
Okay. Well, it's funny. It's sort of like, you know, how Dan said, it's like you're internally 11, you're internally, you know, when I got my first book deal for my first 2 books, I got off the phone and I told my wife I was going to get, you know, money for writing books. She said, "Oh my God, you're finally getting paid to be immature." And I think she meant that lovingly.
You can tell that to yourself.
Yeah, exactly. But like that voice is very accessible to me. But the nugget of this book for me was and I realized I had to write the book when I thought of this. When I was in 4th grade, and this is the first thing that happens in the book. When I was in 4th grade, there was this kid named Kenneth who lived across the street from the school in a 7-story apartment building. And the apartment building went on fire. And we were driving home from New Jersey, and we see this gigantic, it looked like a matchstick in the sky. Just the top few floors were on fire, and a huge, out of control conflagration. And I went, "Oh my God, that's Kenneth's building." Like, you could see it from miles away. And then as I got closer, I was like, "Oh my God, that's Kenneth's building." And Kenneth jumped out of his 7-story window onto like the fire department trampoline thing where there's like 12 firemen holding the thing. And the next day he talked about it in show and tell. And I was so jealous of this kid who had just become homeless, lost everything he owns. He had to live in like an SRO motel in Brooklyn for like half a year. But I was so jealous of him because he had the most awesome show and tell. And he still had soot on him, like we just wanted to be him. It was the coolest thing because he jumped out of a building. And I wanted to be special. I was this nerdy little kid with all sorts of health problems. I got in a lot of trouble because I had a horrible attention span. Now they would say I had ADD, right? But that didn't exist. So I just had BAD. I was just bad. And I wanted to be Kenneth because then I would be special. And that was my entry point into the book, was remembering when I was a 4th grader, all these things I tried to be special and how much trouble I got in trying to be special.
One of the things, your book was so accessible, both because you're just a really great writer, frankly, but the stories are both remarkable and true. And I put this silly photo on Facebook this week to start, and it inspired people to get on and share stories that were very much like the ones you shared, Jordan. But of course, the art is to place those and position those in a way that we get some perspective, both as adult readers, but then as kid readers at the same way. So it's just a beautiful job. But I always tell people, like, your stories are stories, and in some ways you're also, because all of us, for the most part, even though Dan, your books have some fantastic aspects, they're about real kids. They're about real life and real kids who face hard things. And so that makes me wonder, in terms of doing this job, and I know there's adults and kids who are with us today. Hi, everybody. But what part of this job do you like the best in terms of that specific task of placing stories in a way that are accessible to others? And I'll start, Donna, with you. Just what do you like best about being a writer?
Oh my gosh. I have to start with the Northeast Regional Library in Philadelphia. I mean, that's what I like best about being a writer. What those books did for me and that place did for me, it just provided this haven for this lonely girl growing up with no friends and not a lot of money. And I've always wanted, my goal was always to write books that landed on the shelves of that library for some other lonely kid to find. And even though there's endless challenges in what we do, and everybody knows that, it is such a joy and such a privilege to be able to write those books that then I can connect with other readers. And can I just shout out quickly to Patrick, who's here? Hi, Patrick. These connections that we make with other readers are so important and meaningful to me. And it's just the magic of books that we can connect our humanity to each other. So I know that's a large way of answering that, but yes.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. And Jordan, I'll go back to you. Again, your favorite part of the job.
Well, I generally say my favorite part of the job, believe it or not, and then, kids like have heart attacks and fall down and drop dead hearing this. But my favorite part of the job is the research. I love immersing myself in, like, I wrote a book about a teenager who goes back in time to the Woodstock Festival. which is the closest thing I've come to writing something like what Dan does, where like in The Babe and Me and Mickey and Me, where the character actually does go back to the past and you back to the future. First of all, my hat is off to Dan, because the research task of doing that was so extraordinarily much harder. And the writing a character into the past is like doing a jigsaw puzzle and writing a book at the same time. I found it so hard. So the fact that you do it every time for a living, you just it blows me away. But I love doing the research because you never know where the spark is going to be. So like my friend Julia Brennan is out there in the chat asking, she commented she loves the superhero references in my book. One of my favorite things about writing The Boy Who Failed Show and Tell is I found the website that had every Marvel comic book released by month. So I could see what comic books were actually coming out when I was 9. So every time I refer to a comic book, it's the one I was actually reading at that time when I was that age. And I found one similarly for the Billboard hits. So all I listened to were songs from that year while I was writing. And when did, John Lennon's Double Fantasy album come out? How long before he died, which is a big plot point in the sequel. And doing all this research and getting back in touch with people who were in my 4th grade class and making a Facebook group for people who were in my 4th grade class to say, like, do you remember this? Was Mrs. Fisher as mean as I remember? And hearing, oh yeah, she was terrifying. Like the research, the combination of talking to real life people and doing the paper part, you never know what you're going to find that's going to completely turn everything around and make the story work. And it's so exciting looking for that linchpin that you can hang a book on.
I totally get it. Beautiful. And Dan, you've already talked about one of your hobbies, but again, you're a writer. That's your full-time gig. That's your paying job. What's good about it?
Most of it's good. Most of it's good. I think the thing that I like the best is we have a lot more freedom than most grown-ups have. We don't have some boss telling us what to do. We don't have to drive an hour to some cubicle and and have to wear a jacket. I remember when I was a kid, I said to myself, I don't care what I do for a living, as long as I don't have to wear a jacket and tie. That's all I want. So
I have a day job, Dan. You're killing me.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But we can dress like a slob. I love the freedom that we have. But even more than that, probably not a day or a week goes by when I don't get an email from a parent or a teacher or a librarian saying, my son, my daughter, my student, hated to read. They wouldn't pick up a book. And then they picked up one of your books, and now all they want to do is read. And I caught them under the covers with a flashlight last night reading, and it made me cry, and like just the fact that we can write these silly words on a page and have such a positive impact on some kid's life is so rewarding. I don't think any of us really got into this business to save the world or anything, but we just had a knack for it. But, we really hit on a profession that really allows us to do something good for the world. And that's really the best part, I think, about what we do.
That's fantastic. I remember when I started, I thought being a writer meant sitting all by yourself, making your stories, maybe somebody liked them, the end, go do it again. And that's just really a very small part of it. And to your point, I always tell people, I wish everybody in the world could have the experience of about once every month or two, or sometimes more for some of you, to get a fan letter. Like that experience of having somebody, a stranger, tell you that you made something that was valuable to them, like put me in the ground now. I mean, just one was enough. But then sometimes you get the opportunity to get a bunch of them, and it's a good day. Yeah. So, well, then I'll flip the coin a little bit. I mean, not every part of this job is a joy, and sometimes it's really hard. And what are the parts? I'll start with Jordan. Like, what are the parts of this that are hard, that you struggle with? Because the dream for all of us at one time, and like, I'm going to be a writer, and then you get here and you're like, nobody told me I was going to have to eat that. So.
Right. Right. Well, it's funny because when Dan was saying the thing about like the best part of being an author is you get to sit, and do whatever you want. No one's telling you what to do. I have to laugh. And Paul, this is going to be digging it into you again. But I know a really well-known young adult author, million-selling young adult author, who was late with the third book in a trilogy. And her punishment, Penguin Random House gave her an office in their building. She had to go sit in an office until the book was written because it was 6 months late. And I thought, my God, an author's punishment is having to do what their editor has to do as their job anyway, sit in an office and stare at a computer.
Go to work.
And so like, yeah, so it's like the worst thing that could happen to us is we like, our punishment would be we have to like show up at a desk. And so I think the worst part for me is when I realize like, oh my gosh, I don't feel like writing today, but I really have to because I'm going away this weekend or I'm doing whatever. I really have to make myself. It's the fact that you have to make yourself accountable because there's no one making you do it.
Mhm.
And so there's a level of like maturity and responsibility that does not, shall we say, come naturally to me. And so it's the like, all right, now you have to get your butt in your seat and you sold this book. Now you have to actually make a book. It's the horror of the blank page, I guess.
Yeah, and Donna, how does that sound to you?
Well, I'm enjoying Jordan's theme of immaturity here. I'm liking that. I think that goes for all of us.
Embrace it.
It's terrific. Yes. Well, exactly what you said, Jordan. Some days, I try to make myself sit for several hours every day and work on a book. And some days the words come and some days they don't. And it's super frustrating. Often it's your subconscious is working out a plot point or character, but it doesn't feel that way. It's just frustrating. But then I figure when somebody sees the actual book and they read it, they don't know, or this one, they don't know which days were good days or which days were bad days. They just read the book. And so I just power through those bad days,
Yeah.
Yeah. And Dan, how many books have you written?
165.
So
Woo!
every single one of them has been just smooth sailing, right?
A lot of them were total failures, actually. But for me, I can't speak for everybody else, but I only have the attention span of like 2 or 3 hours of writing a day, which actually is fine because so much of what we do is not writing. I spend a huge amount of time just catching up with my correspondence on email, phone calls, research, stuff like that. And I think writing is a smaller part of what we do than managing a business all by yourself. I don't know about you guys. I don't have any assistant. I don't have any secretary. I do everything by myself, and that's the hardest part. Of course, digging ditches is pretty hard too. So I wouldn't trade places with anybody.
Yeah, years ago I asked, and it was Lori Hall Sanderson and Deb Heiligman, and I'm like, how do you do this, like just physically? And they said, number one, this is pre-internet, actually, shut off the TV, or at least schedule it. And number two, if you want it bad enough, you'll make time for it. And if you don't, that's okay. Like, don't beat yourself up about it. But if you want to do this, you're going to have to 2 hours, 3 hours, 20 minutes, whatever it takes. You're going to have to put your butt in the seat and make stuff. And by the way, the stuff that you make, it's not going to be good. So, and then you have to fix it.
Paul, I would just add that I think, at least for me, you have to be really, really organized to keep all the balls in the air at the same time. And I think if somebody doesn't have that organizational skills, I don't know how you could succeed in this business.
Yeah. And I'll jump on that to say also, I remember when I was quitting my day job. So I wrote my first 4 books at night while teaching full time. And I had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old at home when I started. And I was sick all the time. I was so tired that I had bronchitis for like 4 years. And like, I was so tired. I needed to quit my day job so I could like be a decent parent. Like I needed to have one job just so I could, but I asked 2 other people who had been 8th grade English teachers and quit before me, Rick Riordan and Blue Balliot, whether like we were on a panel together, and I asked them after, like, should I quit my day job? You were 8th grade English teachers. You quit your day jobs. Like, should I do it? What will I find? And I'll never forget, Rick Riordan said, absolutely quit your day job, but don't think you're going to be any more productive. Don't think you're going to write faster. And it's true, your writing fills up the amount of time you have. And so, Paul, you were at least as productive as I am, even though you have a day job, because if you have 24 hours to write 3 pages, it takes 24 hours to write 3 pages.
That's right.
And if you have an hour and a half, it takes an hour and a half.
Yeah. I always tell people, though I don't know if this, I don't want to make a broad generalization, but I do notice men are very comfortable trying to juggle 10 balls and then dropping 5 and then saying, hey, look, I'm juggling 5 balls. And women will juggle 10 balls and drop 1 and go, I'm sorry.
That's probably pretty accurate.
And I'm like, you're juggling 9, but you have to be. You're going to drop some balls. Is the long and the short of it. So, but back specifically to the books. So we have a little more time, so that's good. In so many ways, each of these books are survival stories, I think, and in each book, I think all of you really nailed the endings. Like, not only do you close the loops in terms of like plot wise, but your characters, each of the characters in these books, even though Jordan's character is Jordan, that authentically grow, right? They grow towards some version of maybe like what their best selves might be tomorrow, because they're kids, they're not done. And I'm curious, again, specific to these books, and Dan, I'll start with you, because I mean, I don't want to spoil the end, but you did a thing at the end, which it was so freakingly satisfying. Like, how did you know? Like, do you, not? I don't want to ask you, do you outline kind of question, but is there a moment where you're like, oh, that's what I'm moving toward, or did that reveal itself in the making of the story?
No, I'm an outliner. I'm a planner. These are I use file cards. When I'm doing my research, if I come across like a piece of dialogue or a description of a character or some trivial fact that I think I want to use, I'll just jot it down on one file card, and then I will, once I have like 100, sometimes 200 cards, I'll lay them out on a flat surface, and I'll just start kind of grouping the cards together that go together. And little by little, I'll sort of weave together a story that makes sense from start to finish. I used to do it on computer, but I found that on computer, when the outline got too long, it didn't fit on one screen anymore, and it became difficult to cut and paste back and forth. So I started using the file cards, and I plan out the entire story from start to finish before I write a word. That's just my system. Some authors, I figure you just stare at a blank screen and you start typing, and I figure those people must be geniuses. I can't work like that. And I just kind of try and take the reader on a roller coaster, and hopefully end with a surprise ending that knocks their socks off. And I'm glad you like the ending, by the way, Paul. But that's my system. I'm sure everybody has their own personal system that works for them.
Yeah. And Donna and Jordan, I'll go to Donna next, but each of your books have almost what I feel like is almost like a little bit of a coda. Like, there's just this sense of a good landing. Do you know what I mean? And so Donna, I'm curious, like, did that scene reveal itself early on in that very last chapter, or at the end, did you, like, sometimes I've gotten to a place where I'm like, oh, it's done, but I need a little cushion here. But I always feel like I'm tacking it on at the end, but it didn't, it just felt so organic.
Oh, thank you. So I'm a hybrid model, Dan. I've tried, I can't outline the whole thing, but I can't really get into the writing until I know the couple really big scenes and the ending. Once I know those things, that's kind of like all the roadmap I need to move forward. Mm-hmm. And in Abby Tried and True in particular, she's an introvert. And I did a lot of research about what it means to be an introvert and was surprised to find that I'm an introvert. I didn't realize that until I did this research. And 33 to 50% of the population are also introverts, but oftentimes the extrovert is the more prized thing in our society. So I was really careful. So, with an ending, you have to land like the external and then the internal, the emotional. So for Abby, I wanted to make sure that her emotional resolution was not, oh, she became an extrovert, or that was ridiculous. I wanted to make the ending that she became incredibly comfortable with the fact that she was an introvert and the power that she had as an introvert. So that's kind of where my ending came from.
And then Jordan, I mean, naturally, since it's a 4th grade year, it was fair to expect that the end of that year would be the natural ending, except the last line of your book. So I was driving when I heard the last line of the book, and I started banging on the dashboard like, no freaking way. I mean, just the last sentences of that book are just, I'm angry and jealous. Like, and that's really where this question came from. Like, sometimes you just have the right words, and that your book, I feel like, ends with the exact right words. And did you agonize over that, or did you like, how'd you know?
Okay. Well, so I'm like Donna in the sense that I always have to know the ending before I write the beginning, so I know what I'm going to land on. And I think of it as like, there's almost like this Carrie Strug effect, right? Carrie Strug was the Olympic gymnast who had a broken ankle, and she landed on her ankle and stuck the landing and went like this, and everyone went nuts because we won the gold because she stuck the landing with a ruined ankle, and then had to be carried off, and it was super dramatic. Everyone's crying. That's the ending you want on a middle grade novel. Carrie Strug, because you stick the landing, but you can't lie and make everything perfect, like what Donna said. So the character sticks a landing, but like you never, you can't say, oh, and their brother's cancer is cured, and their everything that there has to be like a slight minor chord note that the character's internal resolution, they're resolved that they'll make it, but everything's not peaches now. It's not like, oh, I'm done with 4th grade now, you know, my graduate school will be easy because I did 4th grade. So it's a combination of like, the character sticks the landing, but you know that there's a Carrie Strug still has to have surgery. Like there's this, they stick the emotional landing, but their problems aren't 100% over.
Yeah.
Because and that's what makes it feel real. So you want the Carrie Strug, not the Mary Lou Retton. No, I got perfect 10s and it didn't look hard, right? Which all props to Mary Lou Retton, but for a character, because there needs to be a sense that they're not perfect and life isn't perfect. The honest ending is, I stuck the landing and I still have problems in the, you know, my backpack doesn't come off.
Yeah, interesting that I don't do this as much anymore, but sometimes I used to teach writing, and I'd always choose people's first novels for the students, because in the first novels, like carpentry, you can see the joinery, you know, you can see where people are like, I don't know what I'm doing, and they just stick the next thing in. But then when you read, Dan, you know, when we read your 100th book, you can't see the joinery, and for a student, it looks too easy, and because now you're a master at it, and everything is smoothed over. But when you read first novels, they're so heartening, because you're like, oh, I could do that. Which is a lie. But it's fun to see all of you. Well, you're masters at this, and it's really, really cool. So, brief to the outlining. David Lubar said something once, and I know we're all friends with David because he's another master. But the first draft, I don't know if he still does it this way, but the first draft is his outline, and then so what I do is, after I write the first draft, then I go back and I do cards, I do index cards, but I off my first draft, and then it allows me to realize there's big holes here, or these are moments that I want to keep, or that can go. So like you, Don, I'm a bit of a hybrid. So we have a few minutes, and then and I had promised sort of do a little round robin. Each of you, we've all done these before, and I think there's sort of points that all of us like to make when we're on panels, where we get to do talks, either specific about your life as a writer or this book. So I'm just going to ask you to each go around and just give us a brief, just a brief plug on the book, maybe what you're working on next, so people who are with us right now know what to expect, or why should they go to Let's Play Books and buy this book, besides the fact that I say they're awesome and you can't go wrong. So so Jordan, what do you want?
Oh, thank you for not starting with me.
Okay.
This
Sorry,
chair
Jordan.
is great. So,
Yeah.
but I'll start with Jordan. Like, is there something you want people to know about the work you're doing and about the book in particular?
Oh, I was like, is there something you want people to know? Yes, my kids need food. But no.
555.
Right. I think what this book was for me was, it was a message to teachers, because I was still in thinking, right? My original book was to teachers, what I want them to know that I learned as a troubled kid. And so the adult, it's sort of like in Bugs Bunny, right? There's the Bugs Bunny stuff that's in there for grownups, and there's the Bugs Bunny stuff that's in there that kids will like. The Bugs Bunny part of The Boy Who Failed Show and Tell, that's for the grownups, is here are these two teachers. The meanest teacher this kid ever had, who totally does not see a way forward with this bright, hyper kid who can't sit still. And then this amazing teacher who comes in halfway through the book, who finds a way to teach this kid how to be an individual and still survive in the classroom. And so for adults, I want them to read the book and be like, here's how to find what's special in every kid. And that's why I dedicated the book to my second fourth grade teacher, Miss Tuff, because she saved my life. She was the first person who said, like, you can be you and be in school at the same time and be okay. You could be this hyper mess of a kid, but you have gifts. And you could, if you figure out how to balance those, you can go forward. For kids, I think the thing is, I was about as screwed up as you can possibly be as a fourth grader. And again, as a sixth grader in the sequel. I was just an incredibly goofy kid. I had really bad asthma. I had terrible eyesight, so I was terrible at sports. My feet turned in, so I used to trip all the time. I was just like this klutzy little kid, and I was incredibly hyper, and I got in trouble all the time. And I was very fearful and worried. And all of those things are true. So I hope when kids read the book, they see, like, no matter how fearful and worried and struggling you are, you could be okay, because look what this little screwed up kid did. He turned out to, like, he's a grown up. Look, he's okay. Like, look, he's doing all right. And that was the goal for me, for grownups to see, like, you can shepherd a kid through that difficulty, and for kids to say, it's all right, you can get through that difficulty.
That's fantastic. And I'll go to Dan. Like, what is there something you want people to know about your work, about this particular book, and of course some of the other books too. You just have a great shelf.
Well, I will take this opportunity to blatantly plug my next thing, because, right, that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So I am starting a new series, actually. And you know those biographies that are really popular, the Who Was books with the big heads on the covers? You know, they're really popular. Yes. And biographies in general, kids love to read about famous people. I do. I did when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. So I'm starting a new series of biographies, but I always felt that the biographies written for kids lacked a sense of humor, shall we say. They're not funny. There's no spark to them. So I decided to, instead of focusing on, you know, so-and-so was born and then he or she accomplished such and such and then they died, blah, blah, blah. Who cares? Okay, I decided to focus on the unusual and offbeat parts of that person's life. So I'm starting a new series. It's called Wait, What? And it's the first two books are coming out in May about Albert Einstein, which is called Albert Einstein Was a Dope. And the second book is about Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali was a chicken. And so these two books focus on these two men's lives and just the unusual aspects of their lives. Like, for instance, you probably don't know that, most people don't know that after Albert Einstein died, his brain was removed from his head and sat on some guy's desk for 40 years in a jar, you know? So I would do a lot of research into these people and just pluck out the oddball aspects of their lives. And this is coming out in May from Norton Young Readers.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Congratulations. Those look fantastic. And then Donna, we'll go to you. So what do you want to share about, again, your work, the book, maybe what's coming next?
Sure. Okay, first of all, I have to tell you that parts of Albert Einstein's brain are housed in the Mutter Museum in
Mhm.
Philadelphia, which is this cool museum of medical oddities. And I have a book called Death by Toilet Paper, and the final scene takes place in the Mutter Museum because I love it and I think it's so cool. And I took my sons there when they were way too young and they were terrified of it.
That's
Okay,
a cool place.
book talk. First, I have to show you the mug that I've been drinking from, and also.
Just two
Oh,
people
yeah.
outside.
Okay, so speaking of books, so what I want readers to know, Abby, Tried and True, well, it is a true story of what it's like to deal with somebody in your family going through, oh, you do have that cup? Yay, it's awesome. Okay. It's a true story about what it's like for somebody to go through dealing with cancer. There is so much humor in it and so much heart and lots of food because Abby's two moms, one is a chef of savory items and one owns a bakery and makes these amazing cupcakes and cakes. So don't read this if you're hungry because you will need snacks with you. I also have a romantic interest. Abby's very first boyfriend is this wonderful boy who moves in next door and he's so interesting and mysterious. And he, for me, is like the role model of a respectful boy. He asks for consent before his first kiss. And I try to put all these things in. And there's pets in the book. She has this princessy dog. And of course, she has a turtle named Fudge in homage to Judy Blume. So there's so much more to this book than sad. You'll need just a couple tissues when you read it. And then my other book, Go Be Wonderful, is my very first picture book. And I'm so excited. So here's the cool thing I have to show you. The cover, the book jacket, becomes a growth chart.
Oh my gosh,
Oh,
that's
nice.
awesome.
Isn't that
that's
awesome?
fantastic.
So you can hang it up and measure your kids. So Go Be Wonderful is not just for the littles. I have already had, it was so great. Yesterday, somebody got in touch with me and they spent 30 years going to school part-time, working, parenting, and they just got their bachelor's degree. And they wanted me to sign this book for them to celebrate. They put it in their positivity pile to celebrate the accomplishment. So Go Be Wonderful is for any kind of accomplishment or milestone.
Beautiful. That's just beautiful.
Thank
So
you.
fantastic. So now I'm going to turn it over a little bit to our audience, our guests that I can only see all of you, but hello people. And let's see if we have any questions and specific things people want to know about all of your work.
Okay, should we all go around and sort of answer starting from the top one, which I think was the first one by my friend Julia? Does that make sense?
Can you see the questions, everybody? The first one is
I have to open up my chat box.
I can handle that for you guys. I'll read them out to you. Say, what would you tell your 14-year-old self today?
Don't drink that.
I would just say it gets better. That's it. It gets better.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have anything brilliant to say.
Go ahead.
Don't write off all the quiet girls. That would be my, because it turns out that, you know, I married one of the quiet girls. It's worked out really well for me, but I'd say it's to figure that out.
Well, I would say go talk to the people you're afraid to talk to. All those people, all those girls I was afraid to ask out, they all married guys like us. So
yeah, I mean, I was terrified.
Yeah, I married up.
Yeah, I was terrified of quiet girls because I thought they knew something I didn't. So I was very intimidated. It's like it's on the introvert power, right? I was terrified. Like if they're quiet, it's because I'm not funny enough or something like that. And if I had not figured out a way through that, I wouldn't have.
There's a quote, the quietest people have the loudest minds, right? Isn't that great? Isn't that a great
That
quote?
is great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a loudmouth, so I'm going to interrupt.
Thank goodness for you.
And I think this is actually a great question I'm going to ask from Jill. COVID's been, life altering for many people, and we have a lot more writers or people dabbling at writing right now. As a bookstore owner, I've probably gotten 5 or 6 inquiries about self-publishing or hybrid publishing a week in the last 3 or 4 months.
Wow.
So the question that Jill has is, was it easy for you to get published from the beginning, or did you get rejection letters? What about now that you are established? Do you still have to query each book?
Oh, can I answer that? It was not easy. It's never easy. And I always tell kids during school visits, I had 5 completed novels that I sent out and hoped about and wished about, and they were all rejected, and they were all practiced so I could get good enough to sell the first novel that I sold. I started writing when I was 10 years old, my first short story when I was 10. I sold my first novel when I was 40. So that's 30 years of practice. No, it's not easy. I could wallpaper my entire house with the rejections that I got. And even though I have now sold 9 books, I still write things that don't pass the muster, that don't get published.
Dan, you've never been rejected. I know. I saw your website.
Oh.
The world's most depressing picture book.
Oh.
Oh,
Oh, that was my
Dan.
first sale, Dan. Highlights was my first sale.
Dan, this is the best thing I've ever seen in my life.
Oh.
Wow.
Doesn't it make you feel
Okay,
better? There is hope, people.
That's all I have to say.
Well,
So authentic. I love it so much. Jordan, Paul,
Yeah.
what about you guys?
no, that's awesome. I always joke I didn't get many rejection letters when I wrote my first book because I got all the rejection out of the way in my dating life. Before that, I received quite enough rejection. But I got some rejection letters, and I think that the thing to tell everybody, especially kids who are watching, right? They're like, how can I get published now? They're like, how can I get famous when I'm 13? Can you get published now when you're, and of course there are like 5 kids in the world who have successfully done that. But I always tell them, your goal isn't, people don't go up to, Mike Trout and say, how do I become a major leaguer at 12? They say, what do I have to be doing now to be on the path to be a major leaguer? And I think it takes a long time. Like Donna said, you might have to write 5 books before you write the one that's there. And even look, like between my 13th and 14th books, I wrote a practice book that was longer than any book I've ever published, which was very frustrating in a way, but it put me where I needed to be to write this right book. You have to get used to the fact that it's a developmental process. There's tough stuff along the way. There's rejection along the way. But if you're getting rejected, it doesn't mean you're a reject. It means you might not be there yet, or there's some reader out there who hasn't found you yet, but you have to believe it's coming or you're going to quit. It's an exercise in perseverance and trying to continually offer something you haven't offered yet.
I always tell people they're not rejecting you personally. They're just rejecting some words on a page, and just keep trying. And for kids, I always tell kids, don't go to Scholastic and try and get published. Go to Stone Soup. Go to all the websites that accept writing by kids. That's a good first step. I hate to have kids go through the process of rejection that we all went through, in our 20s and 30s when they're only 11 years old.
Right.
Yeah.
I have to interject and just say, I think the best recommendation to writers, whether they're kids or in their 40s, is to attend things like this, to participate and learn what the publishing world is about, because so much, at least of the people that I meet, just don't really have any idea of the business side. And it is a business. And we just had, actually, I just interviewed Namina Forna, who wrote The Gilded Ones, which is on the New York Times bestseller list this past week. She published this book this year, but she tried to get it published like 13 years ago. It wasn't the right time. It just, and you gotta, it's not easy. You guys make it look easy, but it is not easy. All right, let's do one
I
more
always tell
question.
people all you have to do is be better than me.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think I set the bar very high. So
Paul, stop that. All right, here we do have one specifically for Jordan. Lauren says, teachers need to read your book. We all need to sit in someone else's shoes to be better teachers. Was it hard to write about your life?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mrs. Brennan, for saying teachers need to read my book. But no, actually what I found was writing memoir is so much easier than writing a novel. And Dan and Donna, it kind of relates back to our outlining thing we were talking about, and Paul too. The most amazing thing about writing a memoir was my outline was just, I thought of everything that happened in 4th grade. And then I just moved it, I cut and pasted it until it was in order. And then I figured out by key things like when John Lennon died, which happened when I was in 6th grade for the sequel, because I outlined them kind of at the same time. I was able to piece together what happened when, almost month by month through the years, by like what had to happen first and what happened, like things that happened during baseball season, you know, things that happened, whatever. And so because I didn't have to make anything up, because it all really happened, it flowed so easily, and it's so easy to write as yourself. The writing memoir was just a joy from start to finish, because there wasn't that pressure of, oh my God, I have to make something up again tomorrow. It was just, I just have to tell what happened on Thursday, May 28th, 1980. Okay. It was so pleasurable.
That's good. That's good advice. Thank you. I mean, that's good to know.
Yeah, do that.
we're all going to write memoirs now.
100%.
Not me, not me. Every time some kid will say, you should write your autobiography. And I always say, that would be the most boring book in the world.
Well,
Yeah,
how
well,
about,
I was fortunate enough that I got in a ton of trouble. Like that was my superpower was I was terrible at staying off grown-ups' radar, which, you know, I didn't develop that skill, but it worked out for this book and for the sequel.
I'll write about my sister.
let's grab one more question, just because I think it fits our audience. It would be a great question of, what was the hardest book to write of your books? Because you all have great backlists, so that would be wonderful to hear. What was the hardest? Anybody? Dan, you've got so many. Like,
I'll take it. Yeah, the hardest book I ever had to write was a series I did called The Genius Files. And it's a story about these two kids. Their names are Coke and Pepsi, by the way. And they're traveling cross country over summer vacation in an RV with their parents, while these bad guys are chasing them the whole time. And so it's 5 books, and I had them go all the way from California to Washington, DC and back again. And I had to plot out their path along real roads and real places along the way. And instead of having them stop off at, like, you know, the Grand Canyon and Mount Rushmore, typical tourist destinations, I had them stop off at places like the largest ball of twine in the world and the Spam Museum. So I had to collect all these like weird locations and research all of them. And in some cases, I went to the locations myself. I went to the Golden Gate Bridge where the climactic scene takes place. So it involved a tremendous amount of research. I probably spent about a year on each one of the books in the series. And when the series was done, I was happy. And I didn't want to do a sequel. I didn't want to do a follow-up. Kids said, you should send them on a European vacation. I said, no way, it's done. Done. Hardest thing I ever had to write.
Yeah, well, and I think so for similar reasons, I wrote a book called Are You Experienced, which is the one about Woodstock, where the kid travels back in time to Woodstock. And I had to plot out everything that happened for all 3 days of the Woodstock concert, who was on stage and where were Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young on Saturday while this person was on stage, and where was Janis Joplin when this happened? Because I had to find a way that these 3 characters could meet Jimi Hendrix.
Can you take a picture?
And it turns out, after months of research, there was a self-published book by a guy who had been a volunteer nurse at Woodstock, who Jimi Hendrix came into one of the LSD casualty tents to take a nap because he needed a quiet place to take a nap. And I thought, that's it. He's there. He's lying down. All I have to do is find a way to get these kids into the medical tent, you know, and contriving everything so it works, right? So that the world's largest ball of twine happens at the right time, contriving it so the spam jokes don't happen before the spam museum, and on all these things. It's like juggling all these balls. And then on top of that, I wrote that book in memory of someone I grew up with who had died of a heroin overdose the year before. And so it was emotionally hard to write because I was thinking about him, and it's about a kid who's trying to prevent a heroin overdose. And also, like you said, the historical intertwining and the sense of place and juggling all that.
Yeah.
The hardest book for me, and they're all hard in different ways. The hardest book for me was my book, Lily and Duncan. It's the first time I tried alternating chapters, which was a challenge because I try to challenge myself with every book. But this was hard because Lily and Duncan is about a transgender girl who tries to be her authentic self and live her authentic life, and a boy with bipolar disorder. And their stories intertwine and intersect, and they just have to figure out how to navigate their society and their world. And it was hard because I had to do a tremendous amount of research. At the time when I wanted to write this book, my publisher didn't want me to write it. Nobody was talking about this issue. Nobody was talking about transgender people at this time in the news. And they didn't want me to write the book. And I said, that's the next book I'm going to write. And to their credit, once they read the book, they loved it and they supported it 100%. But it was so important for me to get the details as right as I, not in that community, could get them. So I just did a tremendous amount of research, talked to experts and that sort of thing. And it was the most challenging. And it was also the most gratifying because I get the most letters from that book. Some people say, I'm like Lily, thank you for letting me see myself on the page. Some people say, I'm like Duncan, it's so great to see that in a book. But a lot of letters say, I had a letter from an 8th grade girl. I'm not like Lily or Duncan, but because of your book, I have a greater understanding for the Lily and Duncans in the world. And that was everything. That's the whole reason I wrote it.
How about you, Paul? I love that, Donna.
Well, I would say a book that did not get published or rejected. My second novel, my first novel, it was called Defining Dulcie, came out and people said nice things about it. And it was so much fun. And it led me to believe that I knew what I was doing. And so I wrote a second novel with all the confidence of starred reviews. And at that time, we don't do this anymore, but I used to print out the manuscript, right? And then I would go to New York and we would have lunch, and I had lunch with my editor with this big stack of pages that we never spoke about. It just sat there like a big bag of you know what on the table. And finally she said, let's talk about this. And she took it and she put it in her briefcase and she said, this isn't your second novel. It's not really a novel at all, is it? But we have so much confidence in you that we're going to go back to the office. We're going to sign you. They gave me a contract for nothing. They gave me a contract to go write a second novel, but not that one.
Wow.
So, and it was scary and painful, but also scary and painful in a good way. I mean, these people had confidence that I could do it. And but that second book, the writing it was hard, the hearing that it wasn't good was hard, but then walking away from that meeting with like a charge to go do good. And so far so good. I'm the same editor in all my books. I'm really blessed that way.
That's great.
That's wonderful. I love that. Thank you guys so much. Before we wrap up with the formal thank you to you all, I want to do a quick plug for next week's authors, because this program is 6 weeks long. So we have a YA night with a debut author and also some kind of well-known authors. E. Lockhart will be there. She wrote We Were Liars, which is a pretty popular young adult title. And we're also hosting Lisa Klein Ransom, who wrote Finding Langston. And she'll be doing a feature with one of our favorite local librarians, Molly Magro. So we're really excited about that. And last night, I know I mentioned it earlier, but I have to show this. Puberty is gross, but also really awesome. And we featured this book as a kickoff. It was Gina Lovelace. And it's the reason I really wanted to tie it in, especially Donna, was some of the stuff you were just saying about your wonderful book, that our kids being able to connect to people that sound like them, that might share the same hearts as them. It just feels like we're at a wonderful time for middle grade and kids being able to be themselves. And I applaud all of you for really connecting with the hearts of our kids. It means a lot. So with that, please, everybody hold up your most recent book. So at least
Paul, if you could hold up mine, because I'm in a hotel room and I didn't bring it.
Oh,
I'm here for you.
okay, I'll hold up Jordan's. There we go. Oh wait, no, I have to hold up Paul's then too. There we go. Here we go.
Thank you.
All right, thank you everybody for attending. Appreciate you coming and joining.
Thank you.
us.
That was
That
a
was a lot of
joy.
fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Have a great day, everybody.
Have a beautiful
Bye.
day, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Yeah.